Welcome back to the CNBC Conversation.
In this episode, I'm joined by Iraq's Prime Minister, Mohammed Shia al-Sudani. We spoke about the country's economic model and what $60 oil means for Baghdad.
Prime Minister, I wanted to turn to the issue of the economy specifically. Oil, of course, still dominates Iraq's revenues, and the question now is how long that model can hold. At the moment, we're looking at Brent crude around $60 a barrel. That is below the fiscal break-even price of around $90 a barrel. So how vulnerable is Iraq's economy at these current prices? And what is your government doing to break away from this long-running dependence on oil?
Unfortunately, Iraq is known for being a monodiscipline economy, relying on oil as the primary source of budget expenditure. This has been a policy for decades. Several attempts were made by previous governments to create a diversified economy, but these attempts did not yield tangible results. This government has taken the problem and challenge into consideration. Therefore, one of our priorities was to reform the economy by supporting the sectors driving the economy, i.e. industry, agriculture, trade, and communications. This has been achieved by attracting the private sector on the one hand and using portions of oil revenues to invest them in advancing these sectors, especially since we focused on the infrastructure, which is a priority for citizens. These are reforms initiated by the government, and we have achieved a significant part of them. Yes, we must continue these reforms to achieve a diversified economy, especially because we have vast natural resources that enable us to transform Iraq into an industrial country. Our distinguished geographical location can serve as a corridor for trade, and this is what we have proposed under the Development Road project linking Europe to Asia. So we have many opportunities with the policies we have put in place. I believe we will have a diversified economy.
Specifically on this issue, though, the IMF has said that Iraq is at what it called a critical financial juncture. We're seeing rising spending here, and what the IMF also says is unsustainable wage bills as well. At the same time, the United States has also cut several Iraqi banks off from US dollar transactions. So how long will those restrictions last, and what is your government doing to restore confidence in the financial system, which many people still see as lacking reform?
This is what we mentioned a while ago about economic reforms to reach the break-even point or increase non-oil revenue. And this is what we are working on through transforming the taxation system and reforming the customs system. We inherited a socialist mentality from the previous Iraqi regime. This is linked to the period before 2003. After 2003, with the conditions of instability and the fight against terrorism, these reforms were not the main focus of any government. Today, we have begun this path and will improve the reality of our non-oil revenues until we truly achieve a strong economy that can withstand crisis.
One of the other things that we've seen in recent years is Iraq becoming closer to the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia and the UAE. How important are these partnerships in delivering the economic reforms that you're moving on the ground in Iraq and ensuring that investment is also flowing into the country?
Iraq is certainly part of its Arab environment and takes pride in its fraternal relations with our brothers in these countries. Everyone is keen to continue developing cooperation. Part of our foreign policy is to adopt the principle of intertwining interests and creating economic partnerships that contribute to creating stability in Iraq and the region. It also aims to invest funds, capitals, and companies in sister countries that have successful experiences in many sectors, paving the way for such successful economies and providing clear services in some countries in the region, especially Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar. Hence, the Qatari investment in Iraq today has exceeded $5 billion. There are several projects with the UAE at Seaport, and there is research in the petrochemical and energy industries. In addition, we have signed agreements to create electricity generation plants with companies such as Masdar, with which we signed a contract to produce 1,000 megawatts. With Saudi Arabia, there are partnerships between Iraq and Saudi private sectors, in addition to a memoranda of understanding signed between the Iraqi Development Fund and the Saudi Investment Fund. The government's policy is to promote greater economic integration and cooperation. There is also integration and connectivity in the service sector. We note that Iraq's electricity grid is linked to the GCC countries. There is also a link with Jordan. This is the government's policy and methodology during this period.
I wanted to turn our focus specifically to the energy sector as well. Iraq is one of the founding members of OPEC. At the same time, it's also one of OPEC's largest producers as well. Are you comfortable with the current OPEC quotas, or does Baghdad need more flexibility?
Iraq is certainly a fundamental and founding member of OPEC and is keen to remain in this organization and implement its policies that maintain stability of the energy markets. However, at the same time, Iraq began making clear official demands to OPEC regarding a review of Iraq's allocated quota, given that Iraq is one of the countries with large reserves. Furthermore, Iraq's population today exceeds 45 million. In addition to the extent of disruption to the oil market in the 1980s, the blockade imposed in the 1990s, and the war on terrorism, this entitles Iraq to have this issue addressed in light of the need for financial revenue to cover the costs of reconstruction after the war. We are conducting dialogue with our brothers and friends in OPEC to reach a formal understanding, while emphasizing we are keen to remain in OPEC and support its policies and decisions in a manner that maintains price stability in the energy market, in line with our principle of taking into account the interests of producers and consumers.
Let me ask you about what's happening inside Iraq specifically as well, because Iraq still suffers from major power outages that impact productivity and economic growth. Why is that the case? And when are we going to see genuine progress on this issue to ensure that everyday Iraqis can keep the lights on?
Unfortunately, there has been no optimal investment in Iraq's oil and gas assets. This is proven by our import of $4 billion worth of gas from Iran. Besides, we burn $4 to $5 billion worth of gas annually, which is associated with oil production, according to the contract signed since 2009. We import oil derivatives, even though we produce 4 million barrels of oil. Hence, during this government's tenure, we developed a clear vision to address this structural imbalance that affects our ability to generate and produce electricity and provide it to citizens. We entered into agreements with Total Emirati and Chinese companies, and with the national effort to invest in all the gas that is buried. For the first time in Iraq's history, there is a clear plan and real daily action to resolve this issue, with a deadline of early 2028 set for zero gas flaring. This means that the gas that is burned will be supplied to power plants, and we will stop importing gas. We have recently reached the stage of self-sufficiency, especially since we have a project in Basra, which will produce gasoline with advanced grades, and this will enable us to cover our needs and stop importing. This will be reflected in the economy and the budget because there are huge sums of money allocated to importing petroleum derivatives and importing gas. These funds will be invested in other sectors such as food, health, housing, etc.
As you say, Iraq is still very dependent on Iran for sources of energy. And at the same time, everyday Iraqis don't want to wait until 2027 for stable electricity supply. So if you are re-elected, can you pledge that you will fix this issue once and for all?
Yes, this is what we put forward as projects under implementation. We have developed practical solutions to this problem. I mentioned before that these contracts and agreements will enable us to end gas flaring by the beginning of 2028 and, at that time, eliminate the need to import gas from abroad. Recently, we began importing gas from the United States through a contract with Accelerate. We stopped importing petroleum derivatives. These are all reform steps that have taken place during this government's 3-year tenure.
Iraq has also resumed oil exports to Turkey from the semi-autonomous Kurdistan region after a 2-year deadlock over technical and legal disputes. I asked the Prime Minister about the future of that deal.
Baghdad and Erbil have also just resumed oil exports after years of dispute. Do you think this deal will hold, and what does it signal about future relations with Erbil?
This is one of the milestones this government is proud of, as it has found solutions to a chronic problem that has existed since 2007. Through understanding and a vision for partnership relations between Baghdad and Erbil, we reached this important agreement, which represents a starting point for enacting the oil and gas law, and also for more investment in the Kurdistan region, which is an important part of Iraq. We are interested in conducting and implementing investments in various sectors, especially the oil and gas sector.
Do you trust the Kurdish leadership to honor this deal?
Certainly. We certainly have mutual confidence that we want solutions to these issues, which are of technical, legal, and not political nature. This is what's important, and this can be resolved through constitutional institutions that can interpret the laws and set some solutions.